I'm Basil McStank, and I'm here to talk to you about Australia's 21st Prime Minister, Gough Whitlam. But why Gough Whitlam? What's so special about him? Well, let's find out.
Edward Gough Whitlam was born on the 11th of July 1916. Sharing the name Edward with his granddad, he was known as Gough from an early age. He attended St Paul's College in Sydney, attaining a Bachelor of Arts degree. However, he joined the Army Reserve in 1939, and shortly after the attack on Pearl Harbor in 1941, he joined the Royal Australian Air Force. During his service, he reached the rank of Flight Lieutenant, and after the war was over, he attained his Bachelor of Laws degree and joined the ALP in 1945. In 1951, Federal Labor member for Werriwa, Hubert Lazzarini, announced he was to stand down prior to the next election. Whitlam won the pre-selection as candidate for this position, and was elected into the House of Reps in the by-election of November 29, 1952. With the ALP suffering disastrous defeats in federal and by-elections through the late 50s to mid-60s, it was at a caucus meeting on the 8th of February 1967 that Whitlam was elected leader of the Australian Labor Party. Whitlam realised that to stand a chance of being elected as government, the Labor Party needed to appeal to both the working class, as it traditionally had, and the middle class, which made up a majority of voters. It was at the end of this year that Prime Minister Harold Holt disappeared while swimming at Melbourne, and elected in his stead was Senator John Gorton, who called an election in October 1969. Although the coalition won with a slim majority, the opposition won 18 seats, the most they had had since their 1949 defeat. Suddenly, in 1971, Gorton was replaced by William McMahon. Seeking to capitalise on the change of leader, Whitlam aimed to gain public trust and did this by abolishing the White Australia policy. During the run-up to the 1972 election, Labor's strategy was to keep its head down and allow the Liberal Party to make mistakes. Whitlam campaigned under the slogan, "It's time," as Australia had been under the coalition's rule for 23 years. Whitlam promised to end conscription, to release individuals who refused service to their country, free dental care for students, a tax surcharge which would pay for universal health insurance, amongst others. With Labor dominating the campaign, it was obvious that Whitlam was to become the next Prime Minister, which is exactly what happened. On the 5th of December 1972, Whitlam was sworn in as Prime Minister by Governor-General Sir Paul Hasluck, and Lance Bernard sworn in as Deputy Prime Minister. These two men held 27 portfolios for 2 weeks before the cabinet was determined. During these 2 weeks, the PM and Deputy accomplished many of their election promises, such as eliminating sales tax on contraceptive pills, banning racist sporting teams in Australia, and ordering home the remaining troops in Vietnam. The Whitlam government seemingly did not stop. When the cabinet was determined, they abolished the death penalty, abolished university fees, financed highways, set up Albury-Wodonga on the New South Wales and Victoria borders, amongst others. Despite all the great things the government seemed to be doing, it wasn't long before things began to prove troublesome for the newly elected government. Liberal members of the Senate had planned to block government legislation when the hindrance would advance Labor's agenda, and by 1974 they had rejected 19 government bills. Whitlam used this defeat of several bills to prompt a double dissolution election rather than a half-Senate election. The Whitlam government was returned in the House of Reps, and both the government and opposition held 29 seats each in the Senate, with 2 seats belonging to independents. During a period of much instability, it was in March 1975 that members of the Liberal Party felt that Billy Snedden, who had replaced McMahon after the 72 election, was doing an inadequate job as opposition leader, and he was promptly replaced by Malcolm Fraser. Whitlam and his government continued to enact legislation. The Racial Discrimination Act of 1975 caused Australia to ratify an agreement amongst the United Nations regarding racism, which Australia signed under Harold Holt but never ratified. The government also gave the Gurindji people title deeds to sections of their traditional lands, and Australia granted independence to Papua New Guinea. Following a series of controversies involving ALP ministers and revelations of government attempts to obtain foreign loans through unconventional channels, the opposition refused to allow the government's budgetary legislation to pass the Senate in 1975 in the hope of forcing the government to an election. From October to November 1975, with the government's monetary supply effectively cut off, a grave constitutional crisis resulted. With the crisis still unresolved, on the 6th of November, the Governor-General, John Kerr, decided to dismiss Whitlam as Prime Minister. Fearing that Whitlam would go to the Queen and have him removed, Kerr did not give Whitlam any hint of what was coming. So it was on Remembrance Day, the 11th of November 1975, that Kerr withdrew Whitlam's commission as Prime Minister and commissioned the Liberal leader Malcolm Fraser to form an interim government until a general election could be held and dissolve the Parliament. Kerr's official secretary, David Smith, came to Parliament House to proclaim the dissolution from the front steps of Parliament, where he was met by a large enraged crowd. He concluded by saying, "God save the Queen." Whitlam, who had been standing behind Smith, then spoke to the crowd and delivered this famous speech.
Ladies and gentlemen, well may we say, God save the Queen. Because nothing will save the Governor-General. The proclamation which you have just heard read by the Governor-General's official secretary was countersigned Malcolm Fraser. Who will undoubtedly go down in Australian history from Remembrance Day 1975 as Kerr's Kerr.
In the build-up to the coming election, Whitlam held rallies which drew huge crowds, some attendees giving Whitlam money to cover election costs. The ALP lost the election, with the coalition celebrating in the largest victory in Australian parliamentary history, winning a total of 91 seats. Whitlam remained as opposition leader until Fraser called another election in 1977, which he used to send a clear message that Australia had rejected Gough Whitlam. And this was of course evident, with the coalition winning with a majority of 48 seats. Whitlam resigned as party leader and was replaced by Bill Hayden, and then resigned from Parliament in 1978.
So there you have it, Gough Whitlam's story. He's the only Prime Minister to have been removed from office while commanding the confidence of the House of Reps. Whoa! I'm late for a game!
Yes, it's time. Time for old folks. Time for loving. It's time to give. Yes, it's time.
Authorised M. Young, Ainsley Avenue, Canberra, for the Australian Labour Party.